Hello and welcome back to the Retrospective. Last month, the huge wait came to an end for fans of both CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk with the release of Cyberpunk 2077. But it seems like even after the company put the employees through a terrible period of crunch, it just wasn't enough to fully polish the game. A huge portion of people that bought the game believe that it's in an unacceptable state to be released. Nevertheless, another huge portion of the player base have come out to defend the game, and I'm seeing a big pattern here in how it's been defended. Overwhelmingly, the number one comment I seem to be seeing from fans of Cyberpunk 2077 in defence of all the bugginess is, but Grand Theft Auto 5 had bugs. I don't give a toss about Grand Theft Auto 5. I didn't buy Grand Theft Auto 5. I have only played it once, and that was from borrowing it from someone, and you know how many bugs I encountered? 0. Now, that's a completely useless argument to counter an equally useless argument, but only if you don't factor in the sheer amount of times, the volume, and the frequency that I have encountered bugs in this frigging game. And you're not even going to believe it if you haven't played the game. And I dare say, and this isn't a bad thing mind you, if you're not the kind of person that analyses media as you are playing it or watching it, if you go through games and you don't really think about how you're interacting with them, then you might not have even noticed a lot of these. But nevertheless, you encountered them and they were there, because I literally encountered a bug around, on average I'd say every 60 seconds while playing Cyberpunk 2077. These might not be game-breaking bugs, some of these bugs might not even hamper some people's enjoyment at all. These could be graphical glitches, physics bugs, animations not playing properly, but nevertheless, I encountered them on average, I would say every 60 seconds playing this game. And I think in a game as big and as lengthy as this, that is going to wear down on a lot of people. But people have been comparing it generally to Grand Theft Auto, I guess more specifically Grand Theft Auto 5, and I don't really see it. I've suggested in a few comments threads on Reddit and Twitter that the game is actually a lot like Far Cry, more specifically the more recent Far Cries. And that has been met mainly with extreme anger and disgust by a lot of Cyberpunk fans. But really, look at it objectively, please. The driving is extremely similar to how Far Cry has been since the very first game, but it's not just that, it's that in Far Cry you drive to your objectives. There's all these points on the map, and the mission structure in Cyberpunk is extremely similar to how the recent Far Cries have been. This is just my opinion, but I personally believe that CD Projekt Red might have been struggling to get the game out so much that they decided to kind of just lift things from Far Cry, like the mission structure and the idea of having enemy encampments all around, and even stuff like marking enemies and how the stealth works. It's exactly like Far Cry. But moving back to the initial point, the bugs. This is by far the biggest issue for the vast majority of people discussing the game and complaining about the game. People are really pissed off with the amount of bugs. But I think there's something that I've seen literally barely anyone talk about that is far more important that we should really be discussing, and I really hope that you share this video, because I don't usually ask that, but I think more people need to be talking about this, and that is the fact that the developers themselves promised so many features that are just literally not in this game and seem to be never even intended to be in the game really in the first place. The executives at CD Projekt Red and some of the developers in interviews have blatantly lied about features that were supposed to be in Cyberpunk, and those, whether you like it or not, those interviews are advertising the game. It is false advertising. It's blatant false advertising. People were expecting something from the game. I was expecting specifically a few features that I'm going to mention in a moment, and they are just not there at all. And for that reason, I've requested a refund. Unfortunately, I got this from Game. It's the physical PC version, but it has obviously a download code for GOG, and I've had to message GOG about it because Game aren't accepting refunds, unfortunately. It does seem like I'll be getting the refund, however they are absolutely swamped at the moment, so I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon, but fingers crossed on that. Anyway, what I want to do is simply read out a few things that someone has compiled in a list, very handily. A list of things that the developers promised would be in the game, but clearly aren't. And if you want to read it in more detail, I will of course link it down below. The first thing, and possibly the biggest thing for me, as a huge fan of games that do this, such as Elder Scrolls Oblivion, that have really detailed AI systems and schedules for NPCs. The developers promised that this would be in the game, that NPCs would have full schedules that go about their business on a full day-night cycle, and depending on what time of day it was, they'd be doing different things. That was promised, and it is literally not there in any sense. NPCs are just spawned in randomly. They do have names, but they're randomly generated names. And yeah, they have no schedules whatsoever. They just kind of wander about the city. Here's a quote from one of the CDPR developers. "We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in an open world game to date. A full wanted system and more interaction with police, such as being able to bribe them and things like that, was promised to be in the game. There is no such thing, and the police, it takes literally 5 seconds to escape from them. You just have to drive away a very, very short distance, and that's it. They'll stop chasing you. The police pose basically no threat whatsoever in terms of being able to arrest you. I mean, I guess they could kill you if you get into a firefight with them, but it's not often that that's happened to me. They promised immersive police involvement, changing with the area where you committed the crime. That's not in the game at all. In a couple of videos, CD Projekt Red showed off more interesting ways to interact in terms of hacking, where you could sneak up to someone and actually hack them with your wire thing, and also different interesting kinds of viruses. The way it works at the moment, there are some sort of interesting viruses. I didn't really touch upon it because I found that the leveling system, you can kind of do everything to begin with, and then you just get better at doing those things rather than and I want to talk about this quite a bit, possibly in a separate video, but Deus Ex Human Revolution, a 9-year-old game, does pretty much everything better than Cyberpunk in terms of the level design and how you interact with the game. If you want to go a certain way and level up your character in a certain way, that opens up different pathways into how you do things. Like if you wanted to go the hacking route, you could hack doors open, but then there's a charisma route where instead of hacking that door, you could convince someone to let you through. Or there might be round the side of the building a big bin that you could only move if you like buffed up your strength, and then you can move that bin and jump on top of it to get to like a balcony area. It all depends on how you've built your character, and in Cyberpunk you can do everything right from the start. There's a couple of doors that you have to build your strength up to like break open, but it doesn't like lock you out of any area. You just kind of, most of the time it's just literally that you climb on a rooftop and go in a top window or something, or you go in the front door, and they're your only two options basically. It's all really samey, and it doesn't feel like your choices in how you level up matter. They told us there would be more interactivity with the world, similar to how Red Dead Redemption did it with the shops where you could see things on the shelf and pick them up, and adverts that actually target the player, and then you can go to a merchant, and if you've seen that advert, you could, buy that item. We were promised that quest decisions would have an impact on the world and the story, and that is literally not the case at all. It feels very much like nothing really matters, and even if you get to select between sort of a few different options of what you say to people, 99% of the time it will be the exact same response, so it won't even matter what you've said in the slightest. They might as well have just not given you the option to even pick what the character says, because it is purely illusion of choice in this case. It is not choice whatsoever. Also, some quest decisions that they clearly wanted to implement into the game and even started to implement are unfinished. Like, there's a series of quests where someone asks you to tranquilize enemies instead of killing them, and even if you shoot them with a normal gun, which would kill them, it will still act as if they've been tranquilized. So that is clearly a broken quest as far as I'm concerned. That is an unfinished quest. Someone argued with me over this, but I haven't found any sort of weapons other than melee weapons that can even put enemies to sleep. I haven't found any guns, like tranquilizer guns or anything like that. They were insistent that you get this at the beginning of the game, that you can equip it onto a gun and it will make it non-lethal, but I haven't seen it. And basically it's not up to me to find this item. If it's an important item for quests, then it needs to be obvious to the player. That's just good game design. We were promised a day-night cycle that would actually have impact on the gameplay, so perhaps something like it's easier to be spotted in the day if you're going for stealth. That's not in the game at all. Incredible character customization. The character customizer, it's not brilliant. I mean, it's okay. It does its job. I do like the outfits in the game. I think a lot of the outfits are really cool, and it's fun to dress up your character, but it's not really that detailed. We were promised that the use of drones would be a regular part of gameplay if you wanted it. Like, if you wanted to focus your character on using drones, you could do that. Instead, it's just part of a few missions that are just linear, completely linear. We were promised that the life paths that you pick at the beginning of the game, which kind of determine your backstory, would have an impact on the entire game. At the moment, the only impact it has is the very beginning of the game where you start off and how that leads into the main story, and at that point it's just pretty much the same for everyone. There's a couple of items in the game, nanowire and gorilla arms, which serve combat purposes, and still in the description of the item it tells you that there are certain uses which aren't actually in the game. So that's obviously another planned feature that was scrapped. A couple of funny little comments here. We were told it runs very well on last gen consoles. We know that's not the case. And we were also told that the game will launch when it's ready. Definitely didn't happen. We were told there'd be a weather system in the game that would play into the gameplay and even pose a threat to your survival, so extreme weather conditions and things like that. Nothing like that is in the game. We were promised a lot of options through a deep romance system, allowing you to have romances with various characters. There are options there, but they're nowhere near as deep as described by the developers. So that's just a few of the big features on this list, and there are a few other features as well that the developers said were going to be in the game, but then later said, actually, we don't think we're going to have time for that, which is fair enough. But I think the important thing to remember is the developers blatantly said that there were going to be things in the game, and then when the game was released, they hadn't said anything about it that these weren't going to be in the game, and it turns out that it was nowhere near as in-depth as they claimed it to be. This was set to be one of the most immersive games ever. I thought this was going to be seriously immersive. I thought that the AI was going to be actually next gen because people keep using this word next gen and it just never comes. All we get are better graphics, and we never get better AI than literally 9-year-old games. And wait, Oblivion came out even before that. Elder Scrolls Oblivion has better AI than this. So, you know, next gen is not here, in my opinion. But as well, alongside this excuse of, ooh, well, Grand Theft Auto's buggy, so The Witcher 3 was buggy. Trust me, they'll in a few months' time, Cyberpunk will be perfect. They'll have ironed out all the bugs. They'll have patched in fixes for the bugs. But just think about that. Even if they patch in all of the bugs and it just runs fine, it's not a buggy game anymore. Is it still going to be the game that we were promised? That we paid money for? I don't think so. I don't think you can just patch in day-night cycles and, AI that reacts to time of day and goes on schedules. That's the kind of thing you build a game around. You build the level design around from the ground up. AI like that is not just patched into a game. I don't think a lot of these features are ever going to be in Cyberpunk. And the core gameplay, with it being so similar to Far Cry and so much shallower than I expected it to be, even though I don't think it's a bad game, it's still not worth anyone's money, in my opinion. I think it's a real massive disappointment, and I think that we're focusing on all of the wrong things because we need to hold developers accountable to these things. Especially the executives. If they're going to say to the developers, you need to crunch and work all these extra hours to make sure that this game's going to come out, but then it still turns out that they can't even deliver on half the promises that they made, is it really worth it? Deus Ex Human Revolution, again, a 9-year-old game. It had its problems, it had some bugs, but I think there's a really good case to be made that Human Revolution is objectively better than Cyberpunk. And yeah, there's just no excuse for that in a time when we're supposed to be pushing what games can do and getting people to buy insanely expensive new consoles. For what? That's my question to you. For what? And here's a perfect opportunity to say what I've kind of hinted at in a lot of my videos. I think this is the final nail in the AAA games coffin for me. It's been coming a long time, and I actually sort of predicted that Cyberpunk might be the final nail in the coffin. I was obviously hoping that it would be all that they said it would be and more, but I kind of made the decision that Cyberpunk was probably going to be the last new game that I bought, at least for a long time. I'll obviously still be buying the Yakuza games. But as I look at my PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 collection, recently I've played so many games from that era that have blown me away and that have really impressed me that I never got a chance to play as a kid. That's what I'm going to be focusing on this channel for the foreseeable future, and I think I'm going to be a lot less depressed for that. I've been Jake of The Retro Perspective. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.